Part 25 of my Game System History and Theory series of videos covers Napoleonic figure gaming rules. This is version 2, and my apologies for not getting right in version 1, but once I discovered an excellent website linked in the comments, this allowed me to review a host of additional rules without first purchasing them. My version 1 only covers rules I possess and have conducted some level of testing or intense investigation. As this video is rather long, it is divided into chapters based on the scale of the rules. Players not interested in a specific scale can fast forward until they find the scale they wish to view. As indicated in my version 1, yes, it's true, my video series is normally focused on micro armour or World War II modern. However, this series is game systems, and the game systems which are relevant in micro armour are more than relevant in Napoleonic rules, and in fact there are at least 2 sets of rules in this list which have been designed by people that have used the same game systems that they used in their World War II versions of rule. The chapters are divided based on the size of the total force a player could be expected to command in a day-length game and come home at a decent hour. Typically 50 elements per side over 12 game turns is typically a good maximum a single player can handle for a 4 to 6 hour game. There are some exceptions, but this is a good ground rule. Obviously, games which involve multiple players per side can command larger forces, but these games require a large playing area which can be set up for several months, allowing for the lads to drop by each Thursday for a beer and pizza, or in my case, pork sausages and cabbage, to play a single game turn. That way a 12 game turn game can be completed in 12 weeks. I am actually talking about club games in this video which need to be completed in a day, with no more than 6 hours of gaming and 1 hour to set up and pack up at each end. Rules which use an infantry scale, that is infantry figure scale, of 25 to 20 men, typically only allow for each player to command a brigade or at maximum a division or late war brigade. Gamers who are more interested in the figures and diorama are mostly attracted to this scale, as it allows them to create specific regiments in all their glory. I'm uncertain when the first edition came out. This shows the second edition, but it almost certainly predated the old simultaneous movement WRG set of rules, or possibly was a contemporary set of rules, in this case in the US compared with the UK with WRG. I'm only including this because it's the oldest set of rules I'm aware of, predating my involvement with WRG back in 1979. My first set of rules was the sequential version, which came out in late 1979. I never actually had a copy of the WRG simultaneous move rules, which were prior to this date. This set of rules uses a sequential sequence of play, which was reasonably simple. Most of the game systems in these rules are very simple, which makes me believe this is a very easy set of rules to learn and use. I've never seen this played and only discovered it lately, so I'm uncertain how popular they were. Certainly they were only popular in the US because I never saw them outside of the US. Their biggest issue is the lack of supporting material, which makes it difficult for new players to become involved. But, if your main interest is recreating specific regiments and you're really into the hobby, you probably don't need that much supporting material because you can do it all yourself. This is another set of rules which firmly fits the low end of the game system scale. It's designed for both 15 and 20 mil figures, which is a bit unusual at this scale, as normally the focus tends to be 20 mil or greater. General D Brigade is arguably one of the most successful rule sets ever published, particularly at this scale. The rules themselves are well written, with copious examples and, where needed, lots of illustrations. The mechanics are straightforward, so are easy for both teaching and to learn. I've come across a great deal of players praising and suggesting these rules, but in my part of the world I've never seen a game being played, so I have no personal experience. My conclusion is if you're looking at this scale, this is a set of rules you need to consider. However, I've been told it does take a long time to play, so it must be reasonably complex. This could be due to the games being fought, that is, too many figures, but the game system is certainly reasonably complex, or more complex than, for example, Black Powder, which came out later. Several game designers sometimes hate this idea, but the best way of getting a feel for a set of rules is to look at the ground, figure and turn scale. Now the values I have arrived here is a guess, because this is one of those designers which don't particularly like scales. And, could be completely wrong, but I think it's within the range. The rules are designed for 28mm, or at least 20mm or larger, and at that scale, these are quite reasonable and optimal, and are very popular. They are sometimes regarded as the default set of rules to use at this low-level scale, having taken that mantle from WRG. The game system is simple, the order simple is vague but functional, but they are designed for a specific scale, and if you want to command anything larger than division, these rules are probably not for you. One good point about these rules is that they are very well supported, which is a big point for any rules, and the game system is quite simple and easy to play. Now, these very basic sets of rules are designed for 10mm, and I think that's probably the main hook that the game designer decided to hang the rules on. But they are capable of dealing with 15mm as well. As with many Napoleonic rules, it uses a rather unusually small base size, 2 centimetres wide, which has 6 10mm figures on it. So I'm assuming they really rammed the figures in quite tightly. The decision to go 10mm made the designers go for a smaller playing area, which I think is a good idea. As gamers get older, standing all day is not much fun, and if you can have the playing area small enough, you can actually sit like you're playing a board game all day. The sequence of play is rather complex, and this is what I call a formation maneuver set of rules, similar to a big base set of rules. This is a good objective, but the complexity of the sequence of play and some of the charts is not the correct design direction for this kind of set of rules. The biggest issue is lack of supporting material, which, unless the rules covers unusual scales or features of Napoleonic warfare, will probably doom these rules. Considering I'm unable to find them on the web anywhere, I suspect this may have occurred. This PDF-based rules uses rather small base sizes, similar to the previous set of rules, in this case specifically designed for 6mm figures. While the trend these days is for 6mm figures to use the same basing as 15mm figures, this was probably an attempt to allow for a smaller playing area, which again is probably a good idea. Game mechanics are reasonably simple, but it uses written orders, which is a game mechanic which is generally unpopular unless designed very well. Having never played a game, I'm uncertain how reasonable the order rules are. The rules are not easy to read and understand, and there is a significant lack of supporting material, which is always a major factor in a set of rules not being picked up. I assume the main draw is the design being focused on 6mm, which may have got some traction initially, but I suspect most 6mm players will probably move on to rules such as bitchute. These rules look good, uses a reasonably simple game system, and has a few interesting ideas built into it, which adds a bit of flavour and spice. I'm guessing this is optimised for 20mm or greater figures, but looks like they could easily accommodate 15mm figures. If you like this scale, this is worth looking at. However, in this sector, black powder is probably the market leader these days, so I'm uncertain how successful it is outside its country of origin. I suspect this will depend on supporting material. If it's not forthcoming, I suspect these rules will not gain much traction. The only point I have heard some players raise is the unusual basing. However, as black powder also uses rather unusual basing, I'm uncertain what the specific issue is. While I like these rules, the rules are considered by some as very badly written, I suspect due to the translation process. We now move on to rules which allow players to command a corps. Rules which use an infantry scale of between 50 and 90 men per figure typically allows each player to command a corps. A typical game involving 200 figures on a side can represent a force mix of 10,000 to 20,000 men, depending on how much artillery and cavalry is in there as well. This scale allows for figure-focused games as the previous scale, as well as catering to gamers, which require more of a operational game. Players can still create their favourite regiment, although with far less figures in each regiment than the previous scale. The size of the force mix allows for some or more reasonable mixing of troop types, which would be considered as more realistic and interesting. It is an optimal scale for those interested in both the figures and diorama and also gameplay, and probably also historical accuracy. This was the first set of Napoleonic rules which use a sequential sequence of play rather than a simultaneous sequence of play, or at least the first that I'm aware of. The notes indicate this was based on the system used in the WRG micro armour rules, which I found quite interesting. The rules are still available via Lulu, although the version shown here is a special cover, I think only available in Australia. To the best of my knowledge, the rules are the same. I'm uncertain who wrote the rules, so I have credited both Phil and John, but I suspect John Currie was the main driver, with Phil providing possibly some game mechanics suggestions or input. These rules have been astoundingly successful and are still being used today, mainly with 25mm, but also a reasonable amount of 15mm players as well. The separate army lists are good, if simple, and as long as you use the army lists and keep the size of each force down to 50 elements, they give you a very good game. The main issue is the game turn scale, which means there is very little manoeuvring before any battle, if any at all. I feel the way the artillery is depicted is unnecessarily complex, but really it's not a major issue as long as you follow the army list and you don't have too much artillery. The rules cover an astounding period, and the army lists reflect this. While I do not use these rules anymore, they are reasonably playable and complete. Of course, you need to struggle through the terse text, and it's best if someone who knows the rules instructs you in how they are used. But this is a common issue with a lot of rules, so I don't particularly suggest this is a WRG downfall. I think anyone interested in the hobby that has no specific rules in mind can't go wrong if they start with these particular rules. I clearly remember when I first purchased these rules, I was excited. However, after several weeks of trying as hard as I could simply not get a game from them. These rules were an attempt to move from an element maneuver-based set of rules, such as WRG, to a formation allocation set of rules where players maneuver elements into an optimal attack position and then let loose with the assembled attacking force or formation. Writing rules for such a revolutionary game system was never going to be easy, and these rules prove that case. The rules are 53 pages long, but you also need to cross-reference another dozen pages at the end. The rules themselves are an awkward format and not conducive to cross-referencing during a game. In the end, I gave up. It's possible these rules, once you understand them, are the best since sliced bread was invented, but if the effort involved in learning how to play is this difficult, then they were destined to fail. In defence, the basic philosophy of the rules is brilliant, and creating a set of rules which can be learned and are playable using this idea would be a holy grail, which incidentally I'm also attempting to do myself. However, apart from my attempts, there are a number of 6mm rules which fill this gap, such as Bloody Big Battles for Napoleonics and Bluecoat. Looking on the web, I can't find anything about the rules, so I assume they failed well before the advent of the internet. Big Battles Napoleonics is a free set of rules available from the Lancashire Games website. They are very simple, and while they claim to be a Big Battles style of rules, they're probably only suited for, at the most, 2 cores aside. There is only one scenario available, the Battle of Ligny, and a cheat sheet, which also includes a cheat sheet. But as with many freeware rules, support materials in short supply. These are probably good if you're experimenting with a hobby. The rules appear to be designed for 10mm based on the basing of figures. Sam Mustafa is a prolific rules designer indeed. These rules are a classic big base set of rules using 3-inch wide bases and variable unit scales. Each unit keeps tracks of its statistics, so while not specifically a strength point based set of rules, it may as well be. There is nothing wrong with this, but tracking stats for a unit is a major negative feature for any set of rules unless the number of units are kept to a fairly low number. The sequence of play, while not simple, is not too complex for ease of play. The game turn represents a variable time period, assuming 12 game turns for a typical game. Perhaps they represent, on average, 1 hour each. I often find the variable timescale technique is used to get over a number of scale issues when the designer wants to basically create a high-level set of rules that allow people to command large formations, but still wants to get into the nitty-gritty of detail. The basic game system is very innovative, and I personally like it. This is one of the first big base formation maneuver games that I'm aware of, but will turn off some figure gamers because of its board game-like feel. These rules are freeware rules, although I'm uncertain where I actually obtained them from. I would suggest you would need to search for them if you are interested. The rules consist of 139 pages and seem astoundingly complete. The sequence of play is reasonably basic: initiative, strategic movement, morale, fire, tactical move, and then close assault. The fire and close assault are simultaneous and the move phase is alternate, with initiative being the critical factor in determining player order. This really reminds me of Corps Commander, but is probably aligned with the older WRG school of rules, although a lot more polished and advanced. My guess is these rules were developed because of a dissatisfaction with the older WRG rules, similar to the way BGMR was developed in terms of dissatisfaction with the old WRG micro armor rules. If you are a WRG player, these rules are well worth a look at. Field of Battle, according to the source I have, is up to its 3rd edition, so these rules must have had some reasonable traction. The scale is very similar to WRG, but what is really unusual is this uses cards to regulate movement. Each player gets a deck with cards reflecting the commander's capability. Players who are experienced have stated the game system is very good, but without someone to explain the rules to you, you will find it a bit difficult to grasp. These are very unusual rules, and I suspect aimed at playability, while some players have complained about some troop types being too weak. As the focus is playability, I don't think this is a major issue. I suspect if you want a quick, fun, easy game, as long as you know someone who's actually reasonably experienced with these rules, or alternatively has spent the time in order to understand them fully, these are reasonably good rules to go for. As most of the rules in this scale sector, this is designed for multi-core battles, probably 2 at the most. I would expect about the 10,000 men range, so this would be probably 2 fairly small core. It's an interesting scale choice. Most of the rules seem to focus on pre-battle manoeuvring, which I would have thought would have required a higher scale, but the strategic phase concept is interesting. Major issue with Napoleonic battles is the lack of pre-planning manoeuvring or pre-battle manoeuvring, which often was the key deciding factor in a battle. These rules seem to try and address that issue. I've not studied the rules in depth, so I can't tell how well it would play, but based on the length of the rules, I suspect it's a medium complexity game system. The lack of supporting material is a concern. We now go across another set of freeware set of rules. I'm uncertain of the year it was published and the design of the date and name is my best guess, and I could be wrong. The formatting is very nice, and at 22 pages is an ideal length, but it's not as complete or detailed as Elan. For example, its real unique feature is it's a hex-based figure gaming set of rules, which tries to minimise the effect of hexes. Its roots are very board game-like, using command points or initiative chits, which is the term they use in the rules, and having a very basic sequence of play, order, move and combat being their basic sequence of play. The sequence is followed by each command, the order of the commands being based on a chit system. The rules are very interesting and there are a lot of good ideas here, but the hex-based system is something which would turn off a lot of figure gaming players. Now we move to a scale of rules which allows players to command a small army. Rules which use an infantry scale of 200 to 250 men per figure typically only allow for each player to command, let's say, multiple corps, probably about 3 on average, but possibly going up to 4 in some cases. With 200 figures, a player's force mix could represent 40,000 to 50,000 men aside. One set of rules is rather unusual in this list, and that's a DBN, which is an element scale which implies it could deal with very large battles, far larger than I've just stated. But as it's optimally designed for 12 elements per side, armies of 24,000 per side is more typical, and I would guess you could probably double that and get it up to 48,000 men per side. This scale is primarily focused on the gamers who are interested in the operational nature of a game. Individual battalions or regiments are really invisible, although it's possible to have brigades and divisions. This is all about sending in the brigade or division to plug a gap or to create a gap, not about sending in a particular regiment or squadron of cavalry to hit the flank. These rules are a real mystery to me. I do vaguely remember playing a few games back in the early 1990s, but I don't remember much beyond this. They seem to be a club set of rules, which were probably created by a number of players in a single club. I accidentally found an ancient copy of the rules in my files, and this may have been the reason why I'm now creating a video on Napoleonic rules. Regardless, the thing which interested me was these rules seem to be based on DBA, which I found rather surprising. I have been looking at DBN quite a bit lately and always assumed they were the only DBA derivative, but it seems I was wrong. The rules have some editing issues, and there is handwritten errata in this copy, which is available on the Italian IO group site. So I OCR'd it and created a corrected copy, as well as cleaning up some of the editing issues. The rules allow a player to field a force of up to about 40,000 men per side, which could be expected to play in a single day. Apart from this, the game system is rather standard. These rules are rather interesting, as the rules actually have two scales, a tactical scale and a grand tactical. All scales that are shown here are the grand tactical, and the ground scale is based on the element width and scale. The tactical scale is 1/5 what you see here. There are three basing systems. I've provided the metric version of basing scheme A. The other systems all allow for smaller bases, I assume to allow players to play on a smaller playing area. The rules are very short and seem simple enough. It has a reasonable focus on orders, actually very similar to Artie's spearhead rules. I personally don't like this kind of order type thing, but Artie Conleaf has done a very interesting combination of orders and reserve rules, and I think it actually works very well to overcome a major issue with Napoleonic games. Both players can start with equal armies and select part of the forces to remain in reserve. Now, why would you do that? The main reason why you do that is that anything that's on the playing area gets set in order, and you set the orders before you know what the other guy's doing. And it's really hard to change orders. So you need to keep reserves in order to react to the enemy and to exploit weaknesses in the enemy. Of course, once a player has committed their reserves, the other player can now, take advantage of gaps, etc. So there's even an incentive of delaying the deployment of reserves, depending on the situation. It's a very clever way of resolving a major issue with Napoleonics, which is how to create an interesting game when both forces are equal in terms of size or points. These rules are my main current focus for 15mm figures, and I've been studying them a great deal, but have not yet played a full game yet. They are based on DBA, which is not really a major issue, but after careful analysis they are much closer to DBA than the previous set of rules I listed, which was Italian. So optimally, a game is probably played on a 2-foot square with 12 elements aside, like DBA. Anyone familiar with DBA will be familiar with these rules, and they give a good, tight game in a short time period. Each side commands a force of about 20,000 men, so you could refight Marengo using these rules if you wish. I like these rules, and they are perfect for quick games, but anything larger consists of adding more pairs of players. At least that's what it seems to when you read through the rules. Their Austerlitz game would require 4 players on each side, allowing each army to consist of 80,000 men each. While I like these type of massed player games, there are less games and more issue to get together, and more a social kind of game rather than an actual game where you want to determine who wins and who loses. There is elements of DBMM in these rules, so I would expect it is possible to play a game consisting of 40 to 50 elements per side. which I'm guessing would take 4 to 6 hours to play. But I'm really uncertain of this, and that's probably going to be my next major investigation of the rules. As with DBA, this is very much an element maneuver game, where the way you maneuver individual elements gives you victory or causes you to lose, which is a good way of approaching a game when both sides are equal in size. These are reasonably good introductory rules, clearly designed to allow players to refight entire battles of up to 20,000 men a side. They're designed for 15 mil, and the game system seems very simple and very playable. I would probably recommend these rules for any new player in this scale, as the rules themselves are one of the best learning documents I've ever seen. While I've not checked out the supporting material, I've been told there is a good range of supporting material. Before I did this video, I had no knowledge of these rules, but after doing the basic study for this video, I will almost certainly pick up a copy of these rules, as the scale is exactly what I'm looking for, and the simplicity is a big plus. The basing uses 4 figures per base, 2 up front and 2 in the rear system. I think it looks good, but if I was going down the path of the 2-rank path, I'd use 4 centimetres elements with 8 figures in total, as it works better than 15 mil. I suspect this kind of basing, which is common with several other sets of rules, comes from a common root, and I think that common root is an American Civil War set of rules which use that kind of basing technique. It looks good, but I'm not really too keen about the narrow base. I also think the reason why the bases are comparatively narrow on 15 mil is maybe they were designed for 20 mil or greater, and on 20 mil or that larger scale, the base sizes are more reasonable. This is another set of rules where the designer doesn't really want you to understand what the scales are, so I've been forced in making a lot of assumptions for the scale. But using the maximum ratio that is actually provided in the rules of 250 men per element, I suspect the guesses that you see here are probably within the ballpark. These rules are mainly focused on playability, being simple, quick and fast play rules. The site I got the info from suggests that these would be a perfect set of rules for conventions or club play, and I suspect this is correct. The only aspect which worries me is the use of square formations, which I would have thought would have been built into the game system at this scale. I've found Napoleonic rules designers love the ability of infantry to adopt square formation, and rather than building it into the combat results table, they want to give players the ability to say that's in square and that's not in square. I can't fault the designers, but it does make me think the actual design objective was closer to the lower scale of 50 men per element, where such an idea would be quite applicable. Corps Commander uses a rather interesting spin on the big base approach, which we've briefly discussed so far and which we'll be discussing in more detail later. The big base here represents a number of elements in base-to-base contact with each other. While this seems similar to the old WRG unit concepts, this collection of elements is actually treated as if it was a single unit for combat rather than individual elements. As a result, basing is not really critical as long as both sides use the same basing sizes. The basing itself uses the 2-rank, 2-figure up front and 2 figures to the rear concept, which is, as I indicated before, common among some of the rules from the US. I'm, again, really uncertain where the idea comes from, but the Age of Eagles, which is based on an American Civil War game system, uses it, so I think that's where it comes from, the American Civil War rules. 2 ranks do look good, I must admit. However, I would prefer 4 wide. The rules uses the concept of orders, but they are simple enough not to be a major issue. These rules are one that I will definitely investigate in more detail, but mainly because I like Panzer Corps, and the designer of Panzer Corps is the designer of these rules. I suspect these rules may be rather good for 6mm. We come across another set of interesting set of freeware rules, which I've only discovered recently, and I haven't actually investigated these rules in the detail that I really should. The rules do remind me a bit of Lost Battles. That's the Philip Sagan Lost Battles, as all the scales change based on what size formation you wish to command, from division to Grand Army. Based on the game turn scale, I suspect the main focus of the rules is lower scale rather than the larger scale. But as I have not given these rules a solid gaming test, it's difficult for me to guess. The sequence of play is based on events, with activities seemingly occurring simultaneously as well as being rather prescriptive. This really feels like a set of very old simultaneous sequence of play rules, which were very common before the mid-1970s. The rules, although only being 43 pages in length, are very detailed and seemingly rather complex. The formatting is good, using a detailed case system, although it seems to lack enough cross-referencing. I lack sufficient information to make an informed comment on these rules, but they appear to be a true labour of love for gamers who wish a great deal of detail, mainly focused on the historical aspect of games and, as you could imagine by the name, on the command, control and communication aspect of the game. Now we come to Napoleonic Kriegsspiel, which is a set of rules that almost by accident I started designing. For reasons explained in more detail in the designer's notes, I created this set of rules specifically for 15mm based on the Corps Commandeur version 6 game system. While it may seem odd to base a Napoleonic set of rules on a quick play version of Corps Commander, it works surprisingly well. I got this idea based on my attempts to create a 1 element equals 1 company scale set of rules based on Corps Commandeur version 6, which encouraged elements to group together and move and fight simultaneously as a formation to punch their way through a defensive line. The only issue is in World War II scenarios, which start with an attacker advantage of 2-1 over the defender and then a counterattack coming in the second half. In Napoleonics, this kind of scenario is a lot less common. It certainly occurred at Marengo, but not really, and possibly the Battle of Nations, but generally that kind of scenario is rare. As a result, victory conditions for Napoleonic battles is probably the most problematic aspect of these rules, or any sort of rules. And I'm moving towards a system similar to Blücher, basically with some trigger that, once met, will require one side to withdraw and thus ending the battle. The issue is finding the trigger, which is a combination of control of territory and casualties. Now this issue, look, I won't worry too much about the game mechanics here. It's fairly simple and basic. It's designed for sides to command something like 20 to 40,000 each side and complete a game within a day. Blah blah blah. Similar sort of objectives to my original Corps Commander version 6 set of rules. But in terms of the scope or the basic philosophy here, these rules very much are similar to Bloody Big Battles and Blücher, where basically it's not an element maneuver game. It's very much a set of rules where you line up all your forces in an attack position and then let loose with a formation and see what happens. Now, the issue with this is that, okay, if you're reproducing a historical scenario, it works well. But if you're attempting to do two sides being equal, that kind of game system normally ends not very well. That is, you can assemble all your attack forces you want and hit the other guy, but attackers always need 2-1 advantage in order to win anything. And if the other guy can actually respond to it, you never get anywhere. So you end up looking at each other, staring. So, it becomes a little bit more difficult trying to work out how to make these sort of rules work. And in Bloody Big Battles, you have the same issue, although there they try and use historical scenarios to minimise the issue. I'm not quite sure about Blücher. I think in that set of rules, that's not like Bloody Big Battles, that is in terms of an attempt to recreate a historical battle, although they kind of tend to imply that. It's not really designed for that. It is designed for two players with approximately equal forces to meet each other and sort of belt it out. And they kind of fudge things in order to get a result. And in order for me to understand how they do it, probably will allow me to solve that problem with these particular set of rules. Anyway, that's just a philosophic issue that is prevalent in Napoleonics and actually even more in Ancients. And that is, two sides which are equal in strength normally end up giving you a very boring game. Yet in Ancients and even in Napoleonics, that's the kind of games that you aim for. So how do you overcome this problem? Interesting observation, interesting problem to try and overcome. We're still in the scale where each commander or each player can command an army, but in this case you can command a very large army. Rules which use a scale of greater than 1,000 men per element or uses a big base system are firmly focused on the game and allow for big big battles. Now, DBN could be actually placed here, but because the number of elements that you can command typically is about 12 or a maximum of 24, I haven't placed it here. So really all the rules here are very much big base rules. Now, the issue, or the only real issue with big base rules, is that they certainly have a very board gamey feel to them, which turns off many figure gamers. On the other hand, recreating Napoleon's army at Waterloo and 6 Mil does have a certain attraction to it, which is possible with these sort of rules. All the rules have big base rules, which means there is a large base which represents the unit, and the figures are placed on top of the big base. In some cases, they are used as strength points. In others, they're just bling. The base sizes are irrelevant. That is, the base sizes that the figures are mounted on are irrelevant. The big base size is definitely relevant. Now, the only exception to this is Bloody Big Battles, which uses a system similar to Corps Commander, where the elements in base-to-base contact represents the big base, or at least the Napoleonic version of Bloody Big Battles uses this. I suppose the other rules could use this system as well, but as I've never seen a game where this was done, I'm uncertain if there's some technical reason why you can't do it. We start with our first big base set of rules, where players command 30 to 50 big bases each containing a number of 6 mil figures, which probably represent some form of strength points, or possibly you can track this off the playing area. As with the big base rules, the focus is on formation manoeuvring, but the number of big bases seem rather large, but would nonetheless allow you to field a force of 100,000 men, which is a pretty big battle. The feedback I get is these rules are very simple and fun to play, being fast to play, which could be one reason why you can actually command up to 50 big bases. I'm rather impressed with these rules. If you like big base rules which are fast, this could be the rules to select. I'm guessing the speed of play would result in a very averaging out of historical accuracy, which basically is similar to bitchute. There is a smaller scale version called Napoleon's General de Division, which allows you to command the division. I'm not reviewing them because, quite frankly, at that scale there's already too many rules for me to cover. BBB, or Bloody Big Battles, is a set of rules designed for late 19th century warfare, with amendments for Napoleonic warfare called BBNB. The earliest was created back in 2018, although I've noticed there is a second set which is created more recently. When I initially saw these rules, most gamers were using huge printed maps with big bases containing the elements. However, I've noticed these days, particularly those players using Napoleonics, most games use standard elements, 1 inch for the US, and in Europe I use 3 centimeters, which are grouped into larger units. It's a reasonably unrestrictive set of rules, unlike bitchute, and the game system basically ensures you complete a game within 12 game turns or less. In bitchute, the standard is 15 game turns, and it's kind of an artificial end point. It does use orders and messages to regulate activity, and it seems to flow reasonably well. The sequence of play is very simple, with move, defender fire, attacker fire, assault being the main phases. I like these rules, and I feel they have real promise, but the Napoleonics element is underdeveloped and requires some effort from players. Incidentally, these set of rules are not like a DBA. They're not element-based. They're very much formations where you line up all your formations in the correct attack position and then basically let loose the gods of war, and in a comparatively simple manner, which does not involve shifting elements 2 degrees to the left or right, you get a result. And I really like that system, particularly if you're going to try and recreate historical conflicts. BBB is probably the best set of rules out there, even with the issue concerning Napoleonics, if you want to create a historical conflict. That's what they're designed for, and I like them for that reason. I find these rules rather interesting, but do not yet have a copy. These rules can be played with blocks instead of figures, or board game pieces, if you wish. So in that they're similar to the concept used in Lost Battles. If using figures, you mount and base a unit in any manner you wish. What is important is the unit rather than the figures. The rules use a pip system, with the opponent determining your pips, which is a bit unusual, and revealing them when you run out, which gives you a bit of uncertainty. The units are supposed to be hidden until revealed as well, or at least until you observe it according to the rules. These rules are really designed for 6mm and have a major focus on making random-like play for each player. Now, I got quite excited about these rules, but the more I actually drill into that and look at the way that it kind of works, the less I'm interested in it. I will probably purchase a copy because I've invested so much effort into it so far, but I suspect first of all, these games are not, or these rules are not a element maneuver set of rules, which I consider a real positive. They're quite professional and very complete, which I also consider a positive. But they're very much designed on trying to, let's say, simulate the difficulty of command by presenting all these impediments. So, for example, the PIP system, where you don't know how many command points you have. Okay, sounds like a great idea, but it could be potentially quite annoying. Also, the way that victory is achieved and the way you play is just a feel there which I'm not quite sure is the correct feel. It's probably a bit too much board gaming. On the other hand, I do like Lost Battles by Philip Sabin, and they're for ancients, and they're very much a board game set of rules, and they tend to work quite well. Bitchute is not as simplistic as that, but still is more on that side. So anyway, this is something I'll need to analyse more in the future. But it's definitely 6mm, and it's not an element maneuver set of rules. Now, in conclusion, in my investigation, most rules fall into one group. The first is an element maneuver, and the second is more of a formation, assemble your formation and let loose with a single, possibly complex combat to get a result. Bitchute, for example, is an example of the latter, and DBN is an example of the former. I think there is a place for both set of rules, but it did make me think what rules I should invest in. After much thought, I've come to the conclusion a lot depends on the scale of figures you possess. While it may seem rather odd to select a set of rules based on the scale of the figures you possess, I strongly feel if you have 20mm or larger figures, you need a very detailed element maneuver set of rules, such as WRG, Elan, or CCC, or any of the rules in the Brigade divisional scale zone. Now, the main reason is if you're going to deploy or use these large figures, you're probably interested in recreating the regiment or the battalion, etc., and you need a rule which allows you to actually feel the favourite battalion or regiment that you've so carefully painted. Now, most games involve equal sides, so when you use a set of rules at this low scale, which probably only contains 20 to 24 elements per side, if you want equal forces, you really do need a chess-like type of game system where manoeuvring elements gives you victory or a loss. At a low number of elements, you need a reasonable amount of detail, in the rules to make it interesting. So, for example, WRG morale reaction table is truly massive in order to provide lots of nuance and detail for players to use to win. For ancient troop types, achieving this is easy because you can use the rock, paper, scissor approach, But for Napoleonic period, there are 3 basic troop types. They're all much the same. So, how do you win when you've got 2 equal forces? You basically use element maneuver, or alternatively a set of rules which contain a lot of detail, particularly in the reaction area. But regardless, the main reason why you'd go for the divisional brigade scale is because you want to recreate your favourite regiment. Particularly useful if you've got large figures, and they look very good. 15mm is a bit of a transitional scale. While you can use this scale for rules such as WRG, I feel those rules are not optimised for 15mm unless you're using a very small playing area. 15mm allows you to field up to 50 elements per side, which makes the game painfully long if using WRG. DBN and Talion are optimised for 15mm, and I feel those are the rules you should consider for that scale. But I have seen bloody big battles for Napoleonics being played with 15mm, and it seems to look acceptable. Napoleonic Kriegsspiel version 2 was specifically designed for 15mm, so it should be suitable, but these are not production quality rules. So my conclusion now is DBN version 2.1 is the direction I will take if you're going to field 15mm figures. 6mm is all about looks. You can organise your formation in a manner which looks like a real battlefield. It also encourages larger units, with the figures representing strength points, or just bling. Blücher fits in with this scale perfectly, as does Bloody Big Battles for Napoleonics. I wanted to create a 6mm army, but may start with a BBNB using 15mm figures, and if it works, stay with that or move into 6mm. If it fails, then I probably would move towards Blücher using 6mm figures. The big difference between 25mm and 6mm is the former is all about how you manoeuvre elements, while the latter is all about moving large blocks of troops forward and getting some kind of big battle resolution, with little, if any, concern about the exact way your elements pivot, move, spin, or whatever. Before I end this video, one side note concerning Napoleonic's rules I wanted to briefly cover was basing. Napoleonic's, more than any other period of figure gaming, has the most variable basing systems I've ever seen. For World War II and moderns, it's pretty standard at 3cm or 1 inch wide for 6mm. For ancients, it used to be 3cm, and now it's 4cm wide. The only variability is its depth, but generally, whatever depth is required for the figures is acceptable. However, for Napoleonics, the basing width is everywhere, from different widths based on the troop types to basing 4 figures in a line or in a square. I have some theories why this large level of variability exists, such as the origin of the rules being used, but it does make it hard for players to try different rules, because you base for one set of rules and discover you can't use it for another. The trend these days is to allow for any basing size as long as it's all the same. I suspect this is required for new rules, as everyone has different basing based on older rules. I personally prefer the 4cm wide bases with a depth based on the figure depth. I'm experimenting with 2 ranks of infantry on a deeper base, giving me an element of 8 figures, but this is purely for aesthetics only. Players will need to look at basing when selecting a set of rules, as if the basing regime is too rigid and your figures are not correctly based, you may need to bypass these rules as a result. And so we come to the end of my video on Napoleonic rules. I'm certain I'll be updating this presentation in the future as I add more sets of rules to it in my attempt to find the best set of rules to play Napoleonic figures. I'm unpacking my Prussian forces and going to be painting my Austro-Hungarian forces soon, and I want to absolutely use these things because they've been sitting in boxes for the last, I think, 20 years. Denken Sie daran, immer für Heil, Heimatland zu kämpfen.